All right, how are you guys doing? Are you guys ready to have fun? Because I'm amped up. I hope you are too. And if you're not, don't worry. I'm going to get you there by the end of today. I'm excited about what we have to share. As my wife just said, Naked and Unafraid, we're in part 2. Today, we're talking about me being made in the image of God. And I'm just going to kick us right off the bat. Go right to your notes. First verse listed on your notes. If you're here live, if you're online, you got the notes tab. You can open it up there to follow along. We're going to look at the very first chapter of the very first book in the Bible. And this is this to set the stage. God has just created the world, just spoke it into existence. And at the end of this chapter, here's what the author records in Genesis chapter 1, verse 27. It says, "So God created human beings in his own image." And then just in case you missed that, it goes on and says, "In the image of God, he created them." Just make sure you got that. Male and female, he created them. God made human beings. He made me, he made you in his image. You catch the importance of that you were made in the image of God. Because that is the backdrop to what we're going to be talking about today. Is we're in this series where we're basically saying it's time to embrace a life that is full of the rewards of living an open, a large, and expansive life. And what I mean by that is to be the person that God authentically made you to be. We talked last week about vulnerability. We talked about the fact that it's time to expose ourselves. There's risks involved in being who you are, in being the person that God made you to be. To live out the dreams that God has placed in your heart, it will require you to step out and take risks. But we talked about how vulnerability is not weakness. Vulnerability actually is strength. Vulnerability is the opposite of what we think it is. It's actually strength. We also talked about the fact that playing it safe is dangerous. We think that we're playing the odds by stepping back into our comfort zone, and all the while, that becomes the dangerous thing. We talked about opportunity costs, that we miss out on opportunities that make our lives actually in a riskier place by playing it safe than they would be if we would just step out and do what God had designed us to do. And then also we talked about the fact that comfort is way overrated, and that we all need to just get comfortable with being uncomfortable. Being comfortable is the enemy of doing anything substantial with your life. I don't know anybody who has done anything with their life who did it in their comfort zone. Everything you don't have right now is outside of your comfort zone. And so we talked about how that comfort is way overrated. It's the time to choose. If you were with us last week, maybe you weren't, you'll go back and listen, you'll understand what we're talking about. We talked about the story of David, how he was being vulnerable, and he was dancing in the streets celebrating when the Ark of the Covenant was brought back to Jerusalem, while his wife, Michal, was looking from the palace window with contempt at him. And the question is, are you going to choose, when it comes to this idea of being a vulnerable person, are you going to be a window watcher, someone who sits in the window, who's judgmental, who looks passively on what's going on, who has all the answers but is doing nothing, or are you going to be a street dancer? Someone who realizes that in order for you to be the person God created you to be, you're going to have to step out of your comfort zone, and you're going to have to take some risk, and you have to be vulnerable with who God made you to be, and live out the life that God wants you to. Be a street dancer, someone who's actively engaged. And by the way, I just want to point out that being a street dancer does not absolve you from making mistakes or making a fool of yourself. You can, and you probably will. But that shouldn't stop you. You still should do it. You should still step out. So last week, if we were talking about risk exposure, which is probably one of the most widespread fears that most people have in their life, is exposing who they really are. Today we're going to be talking about abandoning smallness. Abandon the smallness within you. The default mechanism in our life is to live a small life. By default, that is our comfort zone. That is where we feel safe. That's where we feel protected. We're going to talk about that. I want to point out to you in your notes in 2 Corinthians chapter 6, verses 11 through 13. This is the author Paul. He's addressing the church in ancient Corinth, and he says this, "Oh, dear Corinthian friends, we have spoken honestly with you, and our hearts are open to you," saying we're exposing ourselves. We are being our true selves with you. We are opening ourselves up honestly to you. It says, "There is no lack of love on our part, but you have withheld your love from us. I am asking you to respond as if you were my own children. Open your hearts to us." He's calling them. I don't know what they were doing in this point in time, but they were playing the small character. They were living small lives. And he's saying, we have opened ourselves up to you. We've exposed ourselves. We've been genuine with you. and we're looking for that same genuine affection. Open your hearts up to us. Be open with us. The author Eugene Peterson, he paraphrases this passage of Scripture by saying this: Dear Corinthians, I can't tell you how much I long for you to enter this wide, open, spacious life. He says, we didn't fence you in. The smallness you feel comes from within. Your lives aren't small, but you're living them in a small way. I'm speaking as plainly as I can and with great affection. Open up your lives, live openly and expansively. That is the call to abandon smallness in our lives, to open ourselves up. That it's going back to last week, to risk exposure, to take a little bit of risk, to step out of our comfort zone, be vulnerable with who we are, with who we feel God has called us to be, the dream He's placed in our hearts, and be open to that. Abandoning smallness means getting beyond the fear fence. You know, that's what Paul was saying. The smallness you feel comes from within. We didn't fence you in. He says you fenced yourselves in. Have you guys ever heard of the African impala? I got a picture I want to show you. This is the African impala. And it's a small deer-like creature, antelope sort of like that style. It's about 3 feet tall. And the impala is very nimble. The impala can run fast. It can jump up to 10 feet in the air. That's high. And it can jump a leap, in one leap, 30 feet across. So you imagine when there are impalas that are in zoos. Imagine the challenge of zookeepers to try and keep an impala in its area, its environment it's supposed to be in. 10-foot tall walls at least, just to keep them in. But no, that's not true. In fact, most zoos can keep an impala trapped behind a wall that's 3 feet or taller. Just 3 feet tall. Because here's the thing about an impala. Impala can jump 10 feet high. An impala can jump 30 feet in one leap, but an impala will not take the leap unless it can see where it's going to land. That is, I think, my friends, where we get trapped. We are like the impala. We have the potential inside of us to do much greater than we are, but we aren't willing to step out and take the leap of faith unless we see how it's going to work on the other side of things. And God's not in the business of showing you all of His cards before you take the leap. You have to trust Him. You have to take a step of faith. See, an impala stays fenced in because they have no guarantee of the outcome. If you remember, it's in your notes, but remember last week we said vulnerability is making a move with no guarantee of the outcome. If you want to be an authentic, genuine person and live the life God has called you to live, you have to make a move without any guarantee of how it's going to turn out. And I'm telling you, it's a risk not because you don't know what the end result is going to be. It's a risk because it may not look pretty on the other side. There's always the chance. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a risk in the first place. You actually have to step out. You have to take the leap. I remember when my daughters were younger and we were teaching them to trust mom and dad. They'd be like on the staircase in our house and they'd be like 3 stairs up and they'd try to jump into our arms, but they weren't willing to let go. And they would try to hold on to the rail and they get as far, and we would always just pull just far enough that you have to get past that center of gravity where you're going to fall. If you don't fall into our arms, you're just going to fall on the floor. You have to, and we'd say, trust us, trust us. We were good parents. We never once were like, trust us. That was funny. Never once did we ever do that. And yet, they were not willing to take the leap without a guarantee of the outcome. Now, the funny thing is, once they learned to trust us in that situation, they would jump before we were ready and almost take us down with them because they were so trusting. But in our lives, we're like, God, I'm so in. I can totally do this. I just need you to grab a hold of me before I let go of the ledge. God's like, no, that's not true faith. If you trust me, let go of the ledge and take the leap. That's how you abandon smallness. This kind of fear that we're talking about today isn't the kind of fear like when you, some of you guys, how many of you guys like to fly on airplanes? How many of you guys don't really like that experience so much? Okay, I'm talking to you right here. We're not talking about the fear of being on the airplane when the incredible turbulence hits, or like I saw this video online where these guys were landing in Argentina and like the turbulence was so bad going over the Andes Mountains that you hear everyone go, woo! Like they're scared, like we're going to fall. Now, I'm not talking about that kind of fear. We're not talking about the kind of fear that you're in your house at night by yourself and you think you hear a noise and you wonder if someone has broken into your home and you know how that fear, we're not talking about that kind of fear today. The fear we're talking about is a little bit less obvious. It's that fear of the shame you have, the fear of making mistakes, the fear of how you look to other people and wondering, you're a little self-conscious about the way you feel if you were to do what you think you're supposed to do, how it would make you look to other people. We're talking about the fear of feeling like you are going to be rejected by other people if you do what you. Isn't that interesting that as human beings, we feel like probably one of the biggest fears we have in our lives is feeling rejected by the group. We want to feel like we belong. And for each person that looks different, but we all want someone that we belong with. And we're so worried that if we do this, even though we feel we should, but we're going to play small, we're going to back off because we're worried that if we do that, we might get rejected from the club, from the group. We see this kind of show up in different areas of our life. And then there's the subtle fear of failure. The fear that I might make a mistake if I do this. I might make a fool of myself. These guys that were just up here moments ago with the golfing, there was that fear of, what if I overshoot the ball? And some of them realized that it became a reality for them. But the fear of failure, or how about the fear of a past failure? About that haunting you. And we hang on to these things, and because of these fears that we aren't willing to let go of, we embrace smallness with our lives. And God says, no, I want you to abandon smallness. You are made in my image. I made you to be great. I made you to be awesome because you are made in the image of God. I want you to follow through, but it's not by playing by your own rules. It's by living in and leaning into the person that I designed you to be. I want to talk to you this morning about the mini you. Everyone has a mini-me. We all have one. You know, the person inside that, by default, it plays to the smallest, and I want to list off some characteristics of the mini you. You get caught up in pettiness. It's the little things that you just get worked up about, caught up in pettiness. How about you hold a grudge against somebody? Whether they did it intentionally or not doesn't matter. I'm holding a grudge. I'm not letting go of this thing. Maybe you're too self-conscious, so worried about what other people might think if you acted the way you thought you should act. You're turned inward. Instead of being an outwardly focused person, it's always, how is this going to affect me? What's this going to do to my world? I want to go eat at this place because I don't like those flavors. I like these flavors. Like there's in the little things even, we turn inward. We compare ourselves to others. The mini-me assumes the worst in others instead of the best. It's funny, whenever there's a situation where you don't know why someone made a choice or what they're up to or why they're late or you fill in the blank, you don't know the answer, we automatically assume the worst, not the best. That's playing to the mini-me. How about passing up on opportunities? It's like, nope, not this time. It's okay. It looks like a great opportunity, but I'm going to play this one. I'm going to sit this one out this time. You go ahead and do that. Having a hard time with giving or receiving compliments. Fear of failure in your life is greater than the desire for success. Can you relate? The mini-me in my life many times goes, oh, there are risks I'm willing to take, but then there's other risks. And no, thank you. I'm going to hold out on that one. The success, the reward of that, it looks great, but not good enough. I'm going to hold back on that. Taking things personally. I heard it said one time there was this guy who loved professional football, and he invited his buddy to come to a professional football game for his favorite team to play. And the guy's like, I am not coming to that. And he's like, why? Why wouldn't you go? I got a thing against football. And he's like, what do you mean? It's like every time those players get in the huddle on the field, I'm sure they're talking about me. You take everything personal. If you understood how little other people actually thought about you, it may relieve you or it may scare you. I don't know which reaction you have, but people don't think about you quite as much as you think they do. Don't take things personally. It probably isn't. Living offended instead of living free. And then finally, living an overdramatic life that majors on the minors. My daughter called me up this week and said, Dad, my sister and I had a conflict. We need your help resolving it. And I said, well, what was it? And she goes, it was something small. It always is. But there's a mini-me inside of us that automatically, by default, takes over and plays to our smallness instead of abandoning that smallness and playing to the greatness that God created inside of us, the desire to live out what He made us, which is to be made in His image. Let's dive into your notes because I want to share with you 4 observations about abandoning smallness. If you want to abandon smallness, you're going to need to embrace these things. The first one is abandoning smallness means growing bigger on the inside. Growing bigger on the inside. What does that look like? When what is in you, or what is on you rather, is greater than what is in you, what is on you will destroy you. If the pressures and circumstances of your life are greater than the character within you, it will destroy you. You will implode. You have to work on the inside. When we talk about growing bigger on the inside than on the outside, we're talking about character. Preparing yourself for the adversity of life so that when risk comes, it's not an all-in adventure. When risk comes, you step out and you may not be able to save face in this situation. You may make a mistake. People might laugh at you, but you're okay with that because you're bigger on the inside than the circumstances around you at that time. It's like an empty burlap gunny sack, the potato sack. You remember back in the day, you used to put potatoes in these sacks, and a sack by itself just falls to the ground. It's worthless, but you fill it with potatoes, and it's going to hold it up just tight, just fine. And we have to build up the inside greater than what's on the outside of us. The smallest you feel in your life right now comes from within you, not from outside of you. It's not your circumstances. It's not the difficult things you're facing in life. It's like this last 2 weeks, I'm preparing for my wife to go on a long hiatus from her job. I've had 2 kids have birthdays. I had a graduation and a graduation party. I had to help my daughter with her economics class, which, by the way, she passed her economics class. Woo! Whew! That was good. And then yesterday I had 3 different parties I had to attend for people that are graduating and you know, it's just different things. And so life gets busy. But the smallness, if I embrace it at that moment, did not come from all those things. The smallness inside of me at that moment in time came from what's inside me and what I embraced in me. You understand, your circumstances don't determine whether or not you succeed or fail. How you respond to those circumstances is what matters. Where are you with it when it comes to character? How do you get bigger on the inside? I want to kind of give you a clue to that. In your notes, there's the verse to remember this week. Paul is writing to the church in ancient Galatia, and he writes these words. He says, "But the Holy Spirit, God's Spirit, produces this kind of fruit in our lives." He goes on to list 9 things: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Those are doozies, all 9 of those. If you are a child of God, you're a person who's living your life for God, Paul says these things are going to be evident in your life. They are a fruit of the way you live your life. People will see in your life the symptoms of these things as a result of what's big on the inside of you. And if you're struggling in this area, you want to grow bigger on the inside than you are on the outside, can I encourage you to go back to these 9 characteristics and work on them in your life? If you're struggling, learn how to love people. When someone cuts you off in the parking lot to take the spot you were going to pull into, is it love or a one-finger wave that they see coming out of you? I mean, at that moment in time, are you bigger on the inside than you are on the outside? If you find yourself with a one-finger wave, it might be time to go back and say, maybe I should act a little more loving in this situation. That will grow you bigger on the inside. I'll skip down to patience. If you want to grow in the area of patience, I have one word for you: children. There is nothing better that'll teach you patience than children. If you don't have kids, I guess a pet, like a really high maintenance pet. Get one of those, it'll teach you patience. But each one of these, you can go to work on them, and I wouldn't encourage you to try and tackle online at the same time. I would pick the one that you feel like you could use the greatest work in, or the thing you think you could grow in the most if you were to put some time into it, some energy into it, and watch what happens as you grow bigger on the inside. See, we are bigger than we realize. We are stronger than we realize. We are born of God, and everything that is born of God overcomes the world. Jesus said those words in John 16:33, "These things I have spoken unto you, that in me you may have peace. In this world you will have tribulation, but be of good cheer, for I have overcome the world." 1 John 4:4, "Greater is he that is in you than he that is in the world." And if you want to grow bigger on the inside, lean into your faith, lean into your God, because you were made in His image, and the more you hang out with Him, the more you become like Him. That's how you grow bigger on the inside. Here's the second thing if you want to abandon smallness, and that is having faith in God. Having faith in God. Remember me talking about my daughters on the stairs getting ready to step out, but they couldn't quite trust us at their earlier ages. They did later on, but not at the beginning. We have to be willing every time to jump out and take that leap of faith, to have faith in God. Vulnerability is taking a step of faith, realizing that all things are possible, not impossible, that nothing is too hard for God. When God puts a dream in your heart, it's meant to be cultivated and nurtured, not to be suppressed and repressed. And how many times have you felt like God is telling you, I want you to step out? You feel this draw in a certain direction. And you're like, God, I just don't know. That seems too risky. I don't think I can do that yet. Have faith in God. Take the leap of faith. Never once has he went like that and said, oops, just fooling you. Never once. Every time he's caught me. Every time. And trust him. Take that leap of faith. We need to act according to our true beliefs. And here's the interesting thing. We often act entirely opposite of what we say we believe. Author Craig Groeschel wrote a book one time called The Christian Atheist. In that book was really, the premise of the book was people who call themselves Christians, Christ followers, little Christs, but their life, the way they live it, is as though they're an atheist. They do not trust, they do not believe in God and the things in Scripture. And I'm calling you out and saying, if you want to trust God, you have to not only say it, you have to do it. And if you want to believe God, you believe God through your actions, not your words. You know this in a relationship. I can't hear you. I can't hear your words. Your actions are speaking too loudly. And I think a lot of times God's in the same place. He's like, what do you believe? You love me? What? I'm not seeing that. Show me. If you trust me, take that step of faith. I called you to this. Do that. If we really believe and trust God, we got to take that leap of faith. I love what Solomon writes in Proverbs chapter 3, verses 5 and 6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Catch this. Do not depend on your own understanding. That gets us tripped up a lot. Seek his will in all you do, and he will show you which path to take. You want direction for your life? You want to lean into the greatness that God has placed in you? Trust him, and he will show you which path to take. The thing is, we get tripped up on that idea of leaning on our own understanding, because when we get in a situation where things seem scary or risky or we don't know the outcome, our fear takes over. And our fear brings up these emotions, and instead of following what we know in our heads, we begin to follow what we feel in our hearts. It'll trip us up every time. And really, lean not on our own understanding. If we understood what we know, and that is that God will never fail us, we would step out anyways. But our own understanding isn't coming from here in those moments. It's coming from here. And we're following the lie. The lie is telling us this is scary. Back up. We got to trust God. Have faith in God. Here's the third thing you got to have if you want to abandon smallness, and that is you need to be opening up your life. Abandoning smallness means opening up your life. Let's be the most teachable, unoffendable people on the planet. Let's do life with God's people even when it gets a little bit messy, and it will. I'll guarantee you that. Let's support and encourage each other. Let's believe the best in people. Let's be the people that when something happens, the way we respond is so contrastedly different than the way non-Christ followers respond that people are like, what is different? Why are they acting different in this situation? Be the bigger person in those moments. Let's believe the best in other people. Let's celebrate one another's wins without being envious or jealous. When other people win, when other people at your work get promoted and you didn't, are you envious, jealous, upset, bitter, or are you happy for them? Even if the reason why they got promoted, or maybe you are a better candidate than they are, and you didn't get promoted, you can still be happy for them and still talk to your boss and say, hey, I'm not quite sure this was handled well. I'm happy for them. I'm glad they're in that position. But are we? As little children, it's so funny watching little children, toddlers. The whole world revolves around them. And when something happens against them or to them, or they don't get something, or they grab something out of another kid's hand, it's like they only see their own world in that moment. They're embracing the smallness that is by default in every one of our lives. But hopefully, as we mature and get older, we begin to have understanding the world does not revolve around us, and we begin to look outward and looking for trying to please other people and lift other people up in those situations. But in moments, let's just be honest, myself included, we have those moments of smallness where we resort back to the immaturity, like, mine, that is mine. Hands off, get away. We all do it. We have to be willing to open up our life. It's time to stop talking about what we're afraid of and start remembering what we're made of. We are made in the image of God. Might I say that is a great image to be made in. Let's make a move. Talk about vulnerability. Let's make a move with no guarantee of the outcome. Are you ready? Are you willing to do that? Are you willing, as I look at each one of you today, and I think of myself as I talk to you, are you willing to step out and take a risk this week to abandon smallness in your life? And it'll scare you to death. Your heart rate will raise, your blood pressure will go up, you'll be sweating, and like, Pastor Mike said to do this, but I am so scared. And you do it anyways. Let's abandon smallness. Here's some ways here at your own church you can do this. Get connected. When's the last time, without us saying, stick around and connect with somebody else, that you look for opportunity to connect with somebody else that made you highly uncomfortable, but you did it anyways because you're like, I'm going to get connected. I'm going to join in community. I'm going to abandon smallness in this moment. Join a serving team. My wife just talked about all the different ways that you could get involved. I'll ask you a question. Some of you guys are involved. Others are not. If you're not, why not? You know, your church community is only as strong as the team of people that serve in your church community. This church is not run on my shoulders, or my wife, or the staff team, or the team leaders. It is the people. And our church is only as strong as the people. We talk at our church about how we believe God has called us to change the world, but it's not going to be changed because several few people abandon smallness and the rest of us huddle back in our corners. It takes all of us. No bench warmers. We all step into the game. So if you're not serving, maybe consider getting involved in serving. How about this one? Be bold in your faith. When you're out at work, when you're in your neighborhood, when you're in your car, when you're at the grocery store, be bold in your faith. How about social media? And let me put a little caveat on here. If you're on social media and you're not acting like a Christian, please keep silent that you're a Christian. We don't want anyone to know, okay? And I think it's lovely that you had this beautiful, juicy burger the other day at the restaurant. But I have not heard you talk about your faith. Do we talk about our God? Are we proud of our faith? Abandon smallness, be bold in your faith, and share with people, hey, so excited, went to church today. I learned today how to be truly authentic. I'm excited to live it out this week. You should join me next week. Put it out there for your entire group of followers and friends. You call them friends, right? It means you care about their eternal destiny, right? What are we doing to try and share our faith with other people with boldness? That, my friends, is abandoning smallness. Look what the author Paul says about opening up your life in 2 Corinthians. We actually read a little bit of this last week. Let me share with you the whole passage. Now, this is a section where Paul, he's addressing the church in Corinth, and he's telling them that I have these weaknesses, but God said this to me. It says in verse 9, the Lord said, my grace is all you need. My power works best in weakness. So now, I am glad, Paul says, I am glad to boast about my weakness so that the power of Christ can work through me. That's why I take pleasure in my weakness and in the insults, hardships, persecutions, and troubles that I suffer for Christ. Get this, for when I am weak, then I am strong. It's counterintuitive. We don't feel that way. When we are showing our weaknesses in those moments, that's the time when God reveals His strength in our life. It's God's strength that comes out in our lives in those moments. Here's the last way that you abandon smallness I want to talk about today, and that is living with vision that outlives you. I won't talk about this long, but I just want to point out to you that it's not just about thinking bigger. It's not all about every one of us going out and being like a world leader or a social media influencer, or we go out and start a multi-billion-dollar company that influences people for Christ. It's not that. It may be that you're involved in something like that, but the vast majority of us, by the odds, are not. It's not about being bigger with your life. It's also about thinking longer about your life. See, if you want to be legacy-minded, you got to think not just about your generation. We talk about next generation transformation here at Epic Life Church. That means you think about your kids and how what you do now is going to affect them and their future and their now. It's thinking about your grandkids, realizing that one day your children and the children in your life that you have influence over will raise up, they will be mature, and they will have kids of their own, and you have the opportunity to work on them. Your grandchildren, the children of that next generation, and then the generation after that. God willing, you live to the age where you actually get to see your great-grandchildren and know that you made a difference in their life. If you want to abandon smallness, it's being faithful in the little things, but doing the things that you're called to do, not backing down. That's how you abandon smallness. I love the words that Moses writes in Deuteronomy chapter 6. He says, you must commit yourselves wholeheartedly to these commands that I am giving you today. Repeat them again and again to your children. Talk about them when you are at home and when you are on the road, when you are going to bed, and when you are getting up. The vision that God has placed in your heart, the dream He's given you, the commands where He says, follow me, do this. You want to be obsessed with these things. You talk about them so much that the people in your life are kind of getting tired of it. Okay, yeah, you've got a vision to change the world. Yeah. I have people all the time I'm like, that reminds me of change your world, I get it. John Maxwell said one time, we got it. Okay. How often do you talk about the vision, the dream that God has placed in your heart? You should be obsessed with it. You should be preoccupied. It should keep you awake, lying in bed at night as you think about the possibilities. And you're bothered by the fact that you missed an opportunity, and how can you fix that for the future? The vision that God has placed in you, it needs to be a vision that outlives you, because it's a very short-sighted and very narrow vision if it's only about a vision about today, and once you pass off the scene, it's dead and gone. That's not legacy-minded, my friends. You need to raise up people in your life that can be the legs to your legacy. These are people that come behind you, that you develop, that you were mentoring, that had the opportunity to take whatever you had in your heart way further than you could ever imagine. But it won't happen unless you are constantly in that moment, always thinking about, praying about, talking about that vision. We're giving with the future in mind. When you're investing, when you're sharing your resources, you're doing it with the future in mind. When you are praying with the future in mind. You are calling God to work miraculously in ways that you have no power to do in the lives of the people around you, your children, your grandchildren, the great-grandchildren, and every person that you have the opportunity to invest in their lives. That, my friends, is what it's like to live with a vision that outlives you. Abandoning smallness that pulls you back is what we're talking about today. Living a life worthy of your Creator, who made you in His image, in His likeness. I don't want to disappoint. One day I want to be able to go to heaven, and I want to be able to look God straight, face in the eyes, and say, I did everything I could, and have Him say, well done, good and faithful servant. You lived out the life that I called you to live. That's how we abandon smallness. As we come to a close today, I want to share with you a story I heard this week that just really touched me. About this guy who grew up in a home with an alcoholic father. And his dad was pretty awful, and things were not good in his home life all the way through to his late high school years. And there was a change that happened in his dad's life, and he got help, and he got out of his addiction. And things drastically changed, and he and his dad became very close up until his dad, I think he passed away a couple years ago of cancer. They had a very close relationship. His dad was a big part of what he did with his life, and in fact, he did great things with his life. Today, he's one of the top social media influencers and communicators in the world. He's a lover of Jesus who goes out and speaks publicly, has a following of over 2 million on Instagram, has a podcast that reaches thousands upon thousands of people on a monthly basis, and he writes books. He's influenced so many people. And he told this story recently. He said, I just had an epiphany. I woke up one morning, and he said, I woke my wife up and said, honey, I just thought of something that was crazy. And she's like, what? Like, she's just in a daze. He says, my dad was an alcoholic. And he changed his life drastically, but he didn't do it on his own. There was someone in his life, his sponsor, who helped him get out of this problem. I've never met him. I don't even know who this guy is. He may still be alive today. I don't even know who this guy is. But do you know he changed my dad's life, which changed my life and my kids' life who weren't even born at that time? And now I'm influencing millions of people, and I probably would not be in the place I am today if that guy had not taken the time with my dad to help him. Because that's cool, but that's not even the craziest part of this. Here's the crazy part. He says this guy himself was an alcoholic. And until he embraced his weakness and stepped in to the very area he wished he could hide and suppress and say, I don't want anyone to know about this. But he was bold about this. He shared with this guy's dad. He said, I've been where you've been, and I can help you through this. I can guide you through this process. I can give you strength and encouragement. And he leaned in and embraced his weakness. God used him to change millions of people's lives, but it wasn't him. He didn't make the direct influence. But legacy-minded, three people disconnected, is now changing the world. You don't know the people in your life and which one of them will change the world. It may be the person you're sitting next to. It may be your kid. It may be your neighbor. Your coworker? Your parent? You don't know. Did you know that Billy Graham came to faith because of a shoe salesperson that witnessed to him while selling him shoes? He didn't make a big difference, or did he? Because if he hadn't, Billy Graham would have never done his ministry. There are people in your life who will change the world, but it will not happen if we embrace smallness. It'll only happen if we become our authentic, true self and live out the life that we feel that God has called us to live, the thing that burns inside you. Right now, I hope right now in your heart there's something that's bothering you while I'm talking. You're like, I know what it is. When he talks about this, I know what it is. And if not, I encourage you to pray and search for it until you find it, because God placed something in every one of us. You are not here by accident. He wants to use your life. And I want to encourage you to embrace the largeness of living out, being the image of God that he created you to be. For some of you, that means that he's got a great plan for your future. And it's time to embrace that and live that out. And it starts, by the way, right now. Not tomorrow. Not next week. Not in a month. Not once I get that promotion at work. Not once we move into the new home. There's so many transitions in our life that we're so good at that. I will start on January 1st when it's a Monday and all the other stuff in my life has been resolved, and that's when I will begin my new habits. No, my friends, there's no good time except for right now. There's time right now to embrace the largeness and abandon the smallness that we've been hanging on to so long in our life. Live out the life that God meant for us to live. And for some of you today, abandoning smallness means putting your faith in God for the very first time. And if you're sitting here in this room, or you happen to be listening or watching online, and you've never made a decision to abandon this life of comfort that you're living and step out in faith to a life that'll be a full adventure, I promise you, it'll be very exciting, very risky, very challenging, very scary, and ultimately very rewarding. You will never regret it. And if that's you today, I want to offer you the opportunity. I'm going to give you the invitation to accept God into your life today, that you would begin today a life wrapped up in God, trusting in him, having faith in him, to abandon smallness and never look back. So I'm going to say a prayer, and as I say that prayer, I invite you to say that prayer in your own heart as a way of accepting God in your life and trusting him. Would you all bow your heads with me? Dear Jesus, thank you for saving me. I believe in you. I believe in your life, your death on the cross, and your resurrection. I recognize today, God, that I'm a sinner. I mess up. I have brokenness in my life. So I'm asking God today that you would forgive me of my sins and that you would come into my life, because when you are in my life, greater are you who is in me than what is in the world. I embrace that today. So I invite you in. Fill me with your Spirit. Lead me and teach me to follow you. And I just want to say a prayer for everyone this morning. God, I pray for each person here that you would give them exhilaration in their bodies right now, in their hearts, in their minds, that the blood pressure would be up, their heartbeats would be racing, a little bit of discomfort as they realize you've called them to something great, and right now you're calling them out of their comfort zone to abandon smallness, to live into the person that you created them to be. God, you're speaking to me directly right now as well. Help me to abandon smallness in my life. Help me to identify the areas where I'm playing it small, and that I would release those areas. Live into all that you meant for me to live. God, for each one of us today, let that be the theme of our week. Starting today, starting right now, we would do our best to live our lives for you. We thank you for this, and in your name we pray. Amen.